Good morning. Well, I have a confession to make. I stole my title from Aristotle. And Aristotle didn't complain. That's one of the reasons I stole it. I knew he probably wouldn't complain. But only the title of the talk, not the substance, only the title. When Aristotle wrote about the one and the many, or as he put it, the one over the many, he is referring to what's called the problem of universals. And universals are simply features that belong to all members of a class. And so, for example, all humans share the feature of humanity, humanness. You, I, and the recluse down the road who nobody likes are all humans, and so we all share in the feature of humanity. But what the question is, what exactly is this shared humanity? Is it something that actually exists out there somewhere, like, say, Plato's forms? Or is it something that doesn't exist out there somewhere, but rather is a feature we've noticed in all human beings and have mentally abstracted as a universal? Well, this is all very interesting. At least I think it's interesting. And actually is related to New Thought, since we're very much concerned with spiritual ideas, perfect patterns, higher selves, and our task of manifesting all of that as our experience through affirmative prayer and other spiritual practice. But it's not what I'm going to talk about this morning. This morning, I'm interested in the idea that the one, call it God, Spirit, whatever the name you like to use, the language you prefer, that the one expresses as the many, and what this means to us in terms of connection. You know, I sneak the topic of the month in someplace, and other aspects of our lives. In fact, if I thought about it some more, I probably would have titled the talk, The One as the Many. The one as the many. But I didn't, and so here we are. But as they say, never let the title of your talk get in the way of what you want to say. Now, the topic this month is connection. And we're certainly connected in many different ways in our lives. We're connected to God, to other people, friends, loved ones, relatives, and yes, even to that recluse down the road who nobody likes. We're connected to the earth, planets, stars, and far-off galaxies that we aren't even aware of. And our conscious mind is connected to our subconscious mind, which is connected to the collective consciousness of all people, which is connected to the mind of God. In fact, much more than just connected. And of course, toe bone's connected to the foot bone, and the foot bone's connected to the heel bone, and the heel bone, well, you know the rest, and so on. I couldn't resist. It's just too tempting. And I haven't listened to them, but I'm sure each speaker so far couldn't resist either. Well, maybe they could. Well, what is the basis for all of this connection? What makes it possible, and how do we use this information in our lives? Now, as a teaching, New Thought is pretty much devoid of mysteries. Unlike Catholics, we don't have the concept of transubstantiation to ponder over, or any of the other mysteries that some religions have. Now, I think the only mystery that we might have is explaining how Spirit, God, which is infinite and a unity, can express as a multiplicity while still remaining a unity. In other words, as Thomas Troward said, a unit. I found that very useful, helpful to think of Spirit in that way. He said to think of it, he compared it to, and then you compare it to, he said it's a unit. So think of all the qualities and attributes of a unit, and then you can understand it a little more, and it did help me understand it a little more. But I think that's the one thing, one mystery we might have. How does that happen? How could that be? But it's important because this idea of spirit being infinite, creating everything out of itself, while still remaining a unity, is the basis for all the connections that are being, really all the connections that might be talked about here this month. Now, I think probably the best way to conceptualize this is to think about a wave. And I'm sure you have plenty of those around here. I saw all that water as I was driving up. Now, a wave has a particular shape, and a wave goes bobbing along on the surface of the ocean, goes bobbing along. But a wave is really the ocean as the wave. A wave is the ocean as the wave. The ocean doesn't stop being the ocean, and it doesn't stop being a unity. And the wave itself is actually the entire ocean, expressing at that particular point as the wave, although the ocean hasn't stopped being the ocean. And in some sense, that entire ocean is represented in that, exists in that wave. Now, of course, the analogy isn't perfect since the ocean isn't infinite. But I think it gets us closer to understanding what's going on. So in spirit, we have an essential unity that contains the potential for all possible connections. Well, this being the case, it's worth taking a closer look at spirit. So what is this thing we call God? In a little book called Creative Mind, Dr. Ernest Holmes offered this definition. And Creative Mind is a little book. It's not only a little book, it's his first book. And I really think it's actually his best book. But it was the first book he wrote called Creative Mind. And he wrote that spirit is infinite spirit, God is infinite spirit, self-knowing mind, life, truth, intelligence, love, all cause and all effect. That invisible power which makes all things out of itself by an interaction of its own thought upon itself. And in his Science of Mind textbook, he writes, if we were to examine the basic principles of the religions of the world, we would find a great similarity. Each points to one central life from whose self-existence all draw their livingness and without which nothing could exist. Well, he's right, and if we look at what religions throughout history have taught about God, we'll find some great similarities. Now, there's a book called The Bible of Bibles. It was written in the 1920s by a man named Frank L. Riley. And in it, he demonstrates the unity of the sacred books of the world by bringing together passages from these texts about various themes. And the religions of the world have some interesting things to say about God, which Mr. Riley summarizes for us. He writes, the following is a composite, condensed definition of God, a summary of the wisdom of the ages. God is beginningless and endless, without form and devoid of passions. All the sacred books declare that God is one, the first and the last, from which nothing can be excluded and to which nothing can be added. God is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, our Father and our Mother. God as Mother is the primal substance and seed of all things, yes, existence itself. Well, I want to stop here because I think this is one of the most important things that we can realize about God, and that it is existence itself. Now, in 2013, a Harris poll found that 68% of American adults said they believe in God, but only 54% were absolutely certain that there is a God. Now, what's interesting is when I first used this, referred to this poll that they do on religion. In a talk, I used a much earlier one. I used, not much, but I used one from 2006. And from 2006 to 2013, there's been a dramatic drop in the percentage of American adults who say they believe in God, either for certain or reasonably, absolutely certain or reasonably certain. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If the belief in God as this old man in the sky, this punishing figure, is the idea that they've given up, then they might be a little better off for it. Well, a lot better off for it. So it really depends on what they've replaced it with, and I don't know what they replaced it with. Well, it's very important that we be absolutely certain that there's a God, and we can be. We know we exist. We know we exist, and so, well, I hope we know we exist. Some people might doubt that they exist, but there aren't too many people who think along those lines. We know we exist, and so we can be certain of existence. Now, if God, Spirit, the infinite mind, this thing itself, is existence itself, then we can be absolutely certain that it exists, because it is existence itself, and we know that existence exists. But we can only do this when we break free of the old idea of God as an angry old man out there someplace, making judgments and casting down lightning bolts. Well, to return to Mr. Riley, God is Lord of heaven, and being omniscient, mind of necessity is God's very essence. This mind is one mind, since God is one. The all-conserving mind, the creative mind, mind of mind. God is not only life, but life of life, light, truth, love, and good. Well, a lot of this sounds like it could have come straight out of New Thought. As you read through these things he's saying, these definitions, it sounds like it could have come right straight out of New Thought, but it actually comes out of the wisdom of the ages, the ancient teachings of different world religions. And that's why we say that we're teaching an ancient truth that can be found in many of the great religions and philosophies of the world. Well, what about us? What's our connection to this one power? Well, first of all, we're created out of divine substance. What else could we possibly be created out of? We're created out of this infinite thing that creates out of itself, because there's nothing else for it to create out of. There's nothing else anything could be created out of. So we know that we're created out of divine substance. Now, a rock is also created out of divine substance. And I won't get started on that, because once I spent a considerable amount, not once, many times, a considerable amount of time in class speculating about whether rocks have consciousness and can think. And actually, I believe they can. But that's a subject for, well, you think about it. I won't get too far into it, but let's assume, I just find it very interesting. And since they are created out of the same divine substance, they would have the capacity for consciousness. But let's say, assume for a minute that they can. Well, how could they tell us? They can't talk. They can't tell us what they're thinking about. Just because something can't tell us if a person can't tell us what they're thinking about, we don't assume that they can't think and they don't have consciousness. So I believe that they can, but that's a subject for another day. Maybe when I come back in August, I'll speak about the intuition of a rock. But if you are interested in it, a few years ago there was an article in the New York Times called Mind of a Rock, which went into this whole idea of rocks having consciousness And it presented the possibility, it did it on a scientific level, a physical level, rather than the level of the metaphysical level of consciousness that I'm talking about it, but it was a very interesting argument. So I guarantee you'll never look at a rock in the same way from now on. But there's something about us that makes us different from and gives us a distinct advantage over the rock. And this something is that we have complete freedom to express the spontaneous action of spirit. And this means that our thought is creative, and we can use this fact for healing and forward movement in every area of life. Now, many people don't see God this way. There was an even more interesting Harris poll. It was done in 2004. And that found that a majority of U.S. adults would make a 15-minute cell phone call to God if given the opportunity. And God had some stiff competition in this survey, because people were asked to choose from a list that included God, President George W. Bush, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Bill Gates, Senator John Kerry, Marilyn Monroe, Hillary Clinton, Elvis Presley, and Martha Stewart. I probably would have called Marilyn Monroe. But God, sorry God, but that's what What's important is the idea of making a telephone call to God. Making a telephone call to someone implies separation. And we can't accept any separation when we think about ourselves in relation to God. You make a telephone call to someone you're separated from. But we're never separated from God. We may think that we are sometimes, but we're not. What we need is a recognition of the connection that already exists. Well, I think you can now see why everything is connected. Spirit, the infinite mind, infinite intelligence, love, beauty, peace, substance, existence itself is the source of all life and the source of our lives. And it is unity manifesting as multiplicity, yes, while still remaining a unity. And so now we can all go connect with someone. And so ends the lesson.